Hey, my name is Asan Juve, and in this assignment, I will be summarizing and sharing my through on this week material, including reading the sexual abuse of black men under American slavery and Foster, and the lecture of Dr. Tommy G. Corey. This week's content really stood out to me because I focused on perspective that are often overlooked, especially when talking about slavery, gender, and victims. So, starting with Foster reading, one of the main point in the sexual, I mean, in is that sexual abuse during slavery did not only affect black women, but also black men. This is sometimes something that is not commonly talked about, and I think that what made this reading so impactful. Uh, Foster explained that enslaved black men were also subjected to sexual violence, humiliation, and exploitation by slave owners. This abuse was used as a way to assert dominance and control, not just physically but psychologically. What really stand out to me is how this challenge the way society typically view masculinity. Usually, men are seen as strong or incapable of being victims, especially in a sexual sense. Because of that, the experience of black men during slavery have been erased and ignored in historical discussion. I think this is important because it shows how history is not always fully told. It made me realize that just because something isn't widely discussed, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means it being silenced. Personally, I found this reading uncomfortable but necessary and forced us to confront the reality that oppression during slavery was even more complex and brutal than we often learn. Moving on the lecture by Tommy G. Curry, I noticed that connection between his argument and Foster reading. Uh, in his lecture, Dr. Curry talked about how black men experience it, especially as victims of violence, are often ignored and minimized. He argued that society tends to focus on black men as predator rather than as victim, which create an incomplete understanding of their experience. He also critiques mainstream discussion about gender and oppression, pointing out that they don't always include the experience of black men instead of those conversation often center around other groups. We can leave out important perspective or the key point he make is that uh, historical narrative shape how we see people today. So if history ignore the victimization of black men, then society is more likely to ignore uh, it in the present as well. I found his lecture really powerful because it challenged a lot of assumption. It made me think about how we define victimhood and who get recognized as a victim. One thing that stood out to me is how he emphasized that acknowledging black male suffering doesn't take away from anyone else's experience. It just adds uh, to a more complete understanding of history. Also, his perspective is important because it pushed black against stereotypes instead of saying black men in a one-dimensional way, and it showed that their experiences are complex and deserve to be recognized. When looking at both the Foster reading and Dr. Curry lecture, together there are some strong connections. First, both highlight how black male suffering has been historically ignored or increased or erased. They show that the issue is not accidental, but part of a larger system of power that control what history gets told. Second, both challenge traditional idea in masculinity. They show that being a victim doesn't make someone weak, and that their experience need to be acknowledged regardless the gender. Lastly, both emphasize the importance of telling a more complete version of history. If we only focus on certain narrative, then we miss a big part of the truth. Uh, my personal reflection. Personally, I think uh, this week material made me reflect on how limited understanding of history can be. Before this, I hadn't really thought about how black men were affected in this specific during slavery. It also made me think about how this pattern still exists today, where certain groups are not fully recognized as victims. I think that why I learn about this is important because it helps us become more aware and more often perspective that we may not usually consider. As someone studying sociology, this is really connect to the idea that society shape what we can as normal or important, and sometimes that means certain experience get overlooked. To conclude, uh, both Foster reading, Dr. Query, and lecture challenge us to rethink what we know about history, gender, and operation. They highlight the importance of including all perspective and especially those that have been uh, historically ignored. And over this week material was eye-opening and pushing me to think more critically about how narratives are formed and whose story are told. So thank you everyone. See you next time.